want to bring in Cedric Leighton, a CNN military analyst and retired U.S. Air Force colonel. Colonel Leighton, thanks so much for joining us. Is the Kremlin sending a message with the timing of this overnight bombardment of Ukraine?
I think so, Wolf, and good to be with you. The way in which the Kremlin has orchestrated this, it's pretty clear to me that they are including this as part of an overall offensive for the summer. This is part of their summer offensive, which includes a ground component, a ground troop component, as well as these drone and missile attacks. So given all of that, and the fact that we had the call between President Trump and President Putin of Russia, and that didn't go that well, according to at least Trump's characterization of it, it seems to me that basically what the Russians are doing is they're thumbing their noses at the U.S. and the entire Western alliance. And that is the message that they're sending. They're in essence sending, we believe we can take Ukraine, we can capture Ukraine, we can subjugate Ukraine. And that is what they're trying to do here. They, of course, will have a tough time actually doing that, but that is their belief and they're acting on it.
And amidst all of this, Colonel, the Pentagon says it's actually halting some of its weapons shipments to Ukraine. The U.S. has been the single biggest donor of military aid to Ukraine since the war began, some 3 years ago. How much has that emboldened Putin when he hears that?
I think it's emboldened him quite a bit. One of the real problems is this is precisely the wrong time to do this kind of thing, to stop the deliveries of weapons and munitions into Ukraine. And some of those weapons and munitions were actually in Poland, right next door to Ukraine, and could have easily gotten across the border without any impact on the U.S. defense stockpile, which was the reason given for this pause in shipments to Ukraine. So yes, this emboldens the Russians. It tells them that the West is divided, weak. They'll read into it that kind of weakness, and they will act on that weakness. The only thing the Russians understand is a forceful response, and that forceful response, they don't see that coming from either the U.S. or NATO or, frankly, Ukraine, because Ukraine is dependent on the West for the aid that it needs in order to survive.
Ukraine says Russia actually fired 537 drones overnight against targets inside Ukraine. That's a record in this war. How much will these halted weapons shipments from the U.S. to Ukraine impact Ukraine's air defense system?
Well, one of the big issues is the number of interceptors that the Ukrainians actually have in their inventory. Their failure to procure more, to get more, and you can't blame them for that, but the failure of the West to provide those kinds of weapons, that makes it much easier for the Russians to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defenses. Basically, the game that the Russians are playing, Wolf, is we will overwhelm your air defenses. We will throw everything we've got at you as quickly as we possibly can. And that's how they get through the air defenses right now. You see the scenes we're seeing right now from Kyiv overnight. And that basic idea is to, in essence, force the Ukrainians into some kind of a settlement with them by overwhelming their defenses. And they do that not only through the drones and the missiles, but also through ground troops, which they're massing on various points along the front line.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, thanks very much for joining us.
Ukraine calls it one of the worst attacks since Russia's full-scale invasion more than 3 years ago. And it comes as the U.S. president engages in telephone diplomacy with the leaders of both countries, just hours after Donald Trump said he made no progress towards a ceasefire in a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Moscow unleashed a record number of missiles and drones on its neighbor. Authorities say the massive aerial bombardment on Kyiv killed one person and injured nearly 24 others. Hours after that deadly barrage, Trump spoke with Volodymyr Zelensky by phone in a conversation Ukraine's presidential office describes as very important and meaningful. Earlier, Zelensky expressed his frustration on social media and warned that without large-scale pressure, Russia will not change its, quote, dumb and destructive behavior. That comment coming just days after the Pentagon paused some weapons shipments to Ukraine. Nick Payton-Walsh joins us live now from London. So Zelensky obviously very frustrated by this. He's been trying to tell the US that Putin simply cannot be trusted. Just walk us through the intensity of these overnight air raids in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear from the readout we've received from President Zelensky's team in the past minutes that they've emerged from this phone call with President Trump, at least projecting a sense positivity here, sounding grateful is the phrase used for the support from the United States, calling it a very important and fruitful conversation, but also saying how President Trump is well informed and they spoke about the opportunities for air defense. Remember, the absence of Patriot missile interceptors, key to stopping Russian ballistic missiles, is something deeply troubling Ukraine at the moment. Trump himself, a matter of hours ago, hinted that indeed those supplies had stopped, as reports had suggested from his own Pentagon. Maybe something different is in the works. Certainly, Zelensky talks about meetings between their teams and the possibility of defense industrial capabilities and joint production. So maybe there's something changing in the dynamic there. Very few specifics given by Zelensky in his readout, but certainly a tone of somebody who perhaps came away from that conversation with something indeed that they wanted. But that came, frankly, the attacks sandwiched by a phone call with Putin and Trump, and then matter of hours after that call, which Trump described as very disappointing, we now have had what seems by Ukrainian figures to have been a record drone assault, mostly centered on the capital, Kiev. Some extraordinary images of the intensity of the anti-aircraft fire required. It does seem as though there was a slight change in feeling about many subjected to this, that perhaps Kiev's air defenses weren't doing quite such the admirable job they've been doing in past months or so, particularly with this higher toll and concerns as well, because Ukrainian intelligence assessments are now suggesting that perhaps Russia, that's risen from about 100 drones a night a year ago, is now able to put forward 500 or so, and may, they are concerned, be able to field 800 to 1,000 in the months ahead. But it's really the absence of the Patriots that leave people concerned. There are suggestions now that perhaps one person may have lost their life on the assault on Kiev last night. Particularly intense, perhaps a bid to challenge Kiev's air defense and maybe to see quite what they have left in terms of interceptors. But here's some of the remarkable images from last night.
Hear the buzz, and all you can do is wait. Kiev has seen this almost every night for months, but there was something about Thursday night's ferocity that seemed new and unchecked, even underground. No sleep is the norm, huddling in basements too. If you're not so immune to the sirens, you turn over in bed when you hear them. Hearing Russia broke another record of drones fired has also happened a lot this past month. What was different was the possibility the capital's air defences behind interceptions like these might be in trouble. Gunners try to pick off drones, but the American supply of Patriots that take down ballistic missiles has stopped, leaving nights here longer and louder, and solace something you find in the subway. A record assault that came moments after Presidents Trump and Putin spoke. That too did not go well.
I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop. And that's too bad.
Among the smouldering remains of civilian worlds terrorized, Ukraine's foreign minister claimed fragments of a Goran 2 combat drone were found, made in China. The growing global footprint of a war where Kiev's daylight is darkened still by the smoke of the night before, and where the damage done is measured in intimate personal loss.
Now we're into, again, a key, possibly defining moment in this war. We don't know the details of the Trump-Zelensky call. Did they find a mechanism to continue supplying Patriots, which the US has said is deeply out of stock in terms of their own supplies? going forwards. There have been suggestions perhaps that Germany might be able to step in and provide something along the lines of that, or at least engage in joint production too with the Ukrainians. That may be one way around this urgent, desperate shortage. Zelensky's been warning for months that Patriots are in very short supply, and indeed Russia has appeared able to ramp up its ballistic missile production, even with some North Korean help in the past months or so. But that's the fight for Ukraine's skies and the protection of its civilian population. Another potentially more seismic threat is building too around the front lines, where we know that 110,000 Russian troops, according to Ukrainian officials, are amassing near the eastern front lines in Pokrovsk and also north of Sumy inside Russia. 50,000 are also thought to be amassing there as well. So signs that Russia is gathering a force possibly slightly larger than that which it invaded with in 2022, according to Ukrainian officials, and that yields potentially deep fears for the weeks and months ahead on the front lines, where Ukraine is suffering from ammunition shortages, manpower issues, and facing a Russia clearly emboldened too by, at very best, the wobbly nature of Western and American support in the past months.